and I'm delighted to say I'm joined on the line by former candidate for Mayor of Manchester, and I believe you stood in the general election as well, Mr. Nick Buckley, MBE. Welcome to the programme, Nick.
Thank you for having me back.
Did you indeed stand earlier last month in the general election, and how did you do?
I did. I stood in Oldham, East and Saddleworth, and I came absolutely nowhere. It was a learning curve for me. I never stood in a general election before. 6 weeks was not enough for an independent to launch any sort of campaign. I knew within 10 days, a fortnight, that I wasn't getting anywhere. Reform UK had taken off because Nigel Farage had come back, and all the discussions in Oldham East was all about reform, Nigel Farage. So it was humiliating a little bit, but like I say, you don't know unless you join the game.
Well, absolutely. And I take my hat off to you for trying. I've never stood for Parliament myself. I wouldn't completely rule it out, but I've just discovered I qualified for a senior rail card today. So, but having said that, some exact contemporaries of mine at university were elected in July after years of slogging round the committee rooms of the major parties, which is what you often have to do. But going back to the election quickly, and we'll move on to the current unrest. You're right, 6 weeks was nothing like enough for the independents to get organised. It was a tremendously disappointing campaign after what, for me personally anyway, was the high watermark of George Galloway's triumph in the by-election in Rochdale back in February, which, whether you love him or loathe him, was a huge slap in the eye for the two main parties, because the local garage owner came second. Yes. David Turner, I think his name was, something like that, with the Labour and Conservative beaten out of sight. Now, general elections are very different. We know people return to their usual political roots, but I can't help thinking that one of the reasons why Rishi Sunak called the election as early as he did was to wrong foot minor parties and independents. David Fleming runs an organisation of independent candidates, and it was really gathering momentum in the earlier months of this year. And then, obviously Farage going with reform, even though a lot of the independents were also left-wing, this whole sort of anti-establishment block was broken. Having said that, the two main parties, Labour and Conservative, got the lowest share of the vote and the lowest total number of votes in decades. People did turn their back on both Labour and the Conservatives. Labour's share of the vote went down from a poll number of 44 at the beginning of the campaign to 34 by the time of the election, and Starmer got far fewer votes than Corbyn did. But the low turnout and reform taking great bites out of the Conservative support meant that he ended up with this entirely false landslide. Your thoughts on the election quickly before we move on, Nick?
I think Sunak did it for two reasons. The first reason was he knew he was never going to get a flight off to Rwanda, and that's what he'd been planning his whole campaign on. So once he knew that wasn't going to happen, he then decided, I might as well go now. Sooner the better, because we're going to lose. I'm only going to get worse in the polls. And if we call a short election, every campaign will be crap, because Tory campaigns are going to be crap anyway. Let's level the playing field by making everybody as bad as each other. And to a certain extent, it worked.
Yes, to a certain extent. 4 people did actually go to Rwanda at a total cost of £700 million. So that's £175 million each per deportation. A truly abysmal record, off the charts abysmal. Britain's government has been off the charts abysmal for decades, Nick, and now we're seeing civil unrest, the like of which we haven't seen since, the Brixton riots, or there were some major riots about 20 years ago, weren't there? Do you think this is a flash in the pan, or do you think that simmering religious and racial tensions which overflowed in Southport look set to explode, particularly in other parts of the north as well?
I don't think this has got anything to do with religious, ethnic tensions at all. I think we've got years of this to come now, of this violence. I think this is a certain part of the British community have finally had enough, and they've had enough of everything. They've had enough of their living standards dropping. They've had enough of watching mass immigration, uncontrolled mass immigration. They've had enough of crime getting out of control. They can't afford to rent houses, buy houses, get doctor's appointments. And all the way through this, every time they've complained, they've been told, you're a racist. You're far right. You're just complaining. I mean, we had decades of these people, their children being mass raped across the country, and they were told to be quiet. And I think they finally had enough. And the Southport incident was just the straw that broke the camel's back. And I don't think that lid can go back on that jar now. I think we've got several years of this until whatever government, and it won't be this government, but until a government starts dealing with this and dealing with the issues that the average English person has, I don't think this is going away, unfortunately.
We've got to take a short break now. When we come back, I'll be asking Nick what dealing with these very serious underlying social and economic problems in Britain actually might look like. We'll be right back. Keir Starmer met with police chiefs earlier today and then announced the creation of a new capability, violent disorder units, that he says will tackle the tiny, mindless minority in our society. And he's also warned large social media companies that violent disorder clearly whipped up online is also a crime and is happening on your premises, adding that the government will work with companies to help solve the problem. Do you think any of this is going to make any difference, Nick, or do you think he's simply papering over the cracks?
He's papering over the cracks and just looking for some headlines as if he's actually tackling something, and he's not. If he thinks he can control social media, well, he's a fool because he can't. And this isn't a small amount. A small amount of people caused the violence, but these demonstrations across the country ended up being violent, and I condemn the violence. That's not the way we get change in this country. But the underlying issues here are extremely unhappy people who've been left behind, who can see other people doing well, who have been told all their lives that don't be patriotic, you're just a racist, you're just a Nazi, stop complaining. They need addressing those issues. Even if these issues are not real, it doesn't matter. People think they're real. They need addressing. Clamping down is just what he's going to do.
Earlier today, Sir Richard Dearlove told LBC's Nick Ferrari at breakfast that he would not be surprised if the riots in Southport, London, Hartlepool and Manchester were not in fact stoked by Kremlin bots. We're not entirely sure where this Channel 3 now that first floated the story of somebody called Ali being responsible for the attack came from. That's linked to Russia because they originally 11 years ago, that site on YouTube posted videos of Russian rally drivers in the snow. Believe it or not, that name went away for a long time, has now been revived as a news website. They published a fulsome apology for having misinformed people. But that misinformation was then picked up and retweeted by Tommy Robinson and also by Andrew Tate, who told people to wake up. It's an absolute minefield, this, and particularly when it comes to blaming Kremlin bots. Well, I'm not buying that, to be honest. This whole Russian interference narrative, it's a very old playbook, isn't it, Nick?
It is, and this is a way of the elite, the establishment, not having to address the real issues on the ground. So let's blame the Kremlin. Let's blame the far right. They want someone to blame they can point a finger to, because the alternative is actually addressing and looking at the real issues. And if they did that, they would find out that they've been complicit in this for 20, 30, 40 years. And this is just the reckoning coming down the line. People have been forecasting this for a long time. I have, because I knew the last couple of years, the next atrocity that happens on our soil will change the game. 7 years ago, we had the Manchester Arena bombing, 22 kids dead. And all we did was sing Don't Look Back in Anger. Well, I knew that was never going to happen again. I knew next time there would be violence. And we've done nothing about this. The government can control this. Change is coming. So the government can either control and manage the change, or they can fight the change. But change is coming. People have had enough on so many fronts, on so many levels.
Well, personally, I think we need a sort of complete societal renaissance, but what Labour are offering is to build hundreds of thousands of new homes. Probably most of them are poor quality, and they removed the requirement for beauty from any future town planning. They're also planning on giving public sector workers a big pay rise, about £9 billion going there. Do you think either of those two measures will help out? People are pointing to lack of affordable housing as one of the main drivers of, sort of unrest, unhappiness, and division.
No, housing is, especially in the big cities. People can't afford to rent in Manchester, never mind buy a property. But building more and just doing that isn't the answer. We need to end mass migration. We've had 10 million people move to the country in 10, 15 years. That's why we have a housing problem. So building more houses will only attract more people to come here. It's the wrong answer. And then when you're looking on your what was your second point? Housing and
a pay rise in the public sector. Basically, we know real wages have fallen consistently over the last 20 years. All these years of Tory austerity, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. People don't want to be austere; they want to be abundant and prosperous.
They do, and a lot of this, again, you can point the finger to mass migration, keeping poor wages, driving down wages, using resources. And you're right. I mean, that's why we've got something like between 7 and 10 million people on some sort of out of work benefits and disability benefits in this country, if not more. There's your workforce. But for many decades now, what all our governments have done, this isn't Labour, this is all of them, what they do is, you're the problem. So we're going to stick you on benefits, keep your mouth shut, and that's how we deal with that problem. And what they should be doing is, how can we create a better environment for British people to have a better life? How can we help you get a job? How can we get better paid jobs in this country? But because of our political cycle is only 4 years, no one's ever planning for the long term. It's always about the political cycle, and that's killing the country.
I would also suggest, before we go, get your comment on this. Do you think the fact that people simply don't socialise as much as they used to, pubs are closing, there aren't the community places that there used to be, this is partly because of the internet. People don't even go to the cinemas. Cineworld, big multiplex operators, closing about a third of its cinemas because they can't afford the rents and heating these places. We seem to have become an increasingly atomized dog-eat-dog society as well, Nick.
I think that's a great point, something I've been talking about for many years. Not only are we breaking down into tribes, you're gay, you're a different tribe, you're Muslim, you're Christian, you're from Bangladesh, you're from Wales. We're breaking down into these tribes and these communities as if that's our identity. But our real identity is living on this island, being British, living under a monarchy. That's what should be holding us together. And then with the internet, you're right. Most people now live their lives online. They don't have real friends. They have internet friends. They take pictures of their dinner so they can post it to say, look what I'm having for dinner. And you're laughing, but we both know it's true. That's what they're doing.
I know.
And we're social creatures at the end of the day. That's why depression rates and mental health issues are soaring. 1 in every 5 women in the UK are on antidepressants. 20% of women, because their lives aren't worth living, because what we're doing to women in general in society. We've got men now who abandon their families. Their children are being raised on benefits. All these problems are
I
driving us
think that,
apart and ruining us.
yeah, man, I think absentee fathers is one of the biggest social problems
Yes,
that we've got. I mean, it's becoming almost the norm rather than the exception these days, Nick.
it is, because we financially reward people to make those decisions. We reward single mums for making bad choices, and we reward fathers when they walk away because we'll pick up the bill. When you incentivize poor behavior, don't be surprised when you get more poor behavior.
And finally, before you go, Nick, there was unrest in Manchester. What's the atmosphere like where you are now? Hopefully, things will have calmed down. Uh, prison sentences are being threatened on the rioters in Southport.
It's strange. It's very strange. I've not felt this before or heard people comment like this before. People are actually praising the rioters. People are actually
Wow.
praising, telling me personally via messages on social media. But I've just put a GoFundMe out to raise money to support injured police officers. Even though I think our police force in the UK is not fit for purpose, I still don't want to see frontline officers are injured anyway, because they're there to protect us. And the amount of pushback I've had on that, which is shameful, but people are frustrated. People are now perceiving the police as the enemy, the establishment as the enemy, and if we don't manage this situation, it's only going to get worse.
Yes, of course. Brexit was the political outpouring of that frustration, wasn't it? And it seems that the metropolitan elites prefer to ignore that lesson rather than take it on board, particularly in the Labour Party, which has long since been divorced from its working class roots, Nick. That's all we've got time for right now, but we'll speak to you again on today's News Talk very soon, I'm sure.
Did you enjoy that video? I think you did. Come on now, hit that bell, subscribe, comment. Let's build this channel. I need more followers, I need more subscribers. Be part of the journey. See you soon.